What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, May 30th, 2017, almost to the end of the month. We're into summer now. Summer began astronomically on the 20th. It began officially on Memorial Day, and so now we're into it. Wednesday, the Pacific Hurricane Warning Center officially opens for the hurricane season. Out here in Hawaii, we only have 2 seasons. The rest of the world has 4 seasons, spring, summer, fall, and autumn. Here in Hawaii, we have 2 seasons, hurricane and tourist. So that's kind of where we are on that. Obviously, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. Mike is in our control room. And a quick word of explanation. We were supposed to have a live show yesterday, including the lovely Lady Claire. Unfortunately, Sunday at 4 in the afternoon here on the island of Oahu, Spectrum, cable, internet, everything went down. No digital TV, no analog TV, no internet. It was a complete, we had dead wire coming into the house, basically what it was. And we were hoping that we're going to get it fixed, and I was in communication with RBN about, last second we're going to get this thing going. And the internet actually did come back just before airtime, and I was getting all set up, and it was about ready to let RBN know that we were going to be live after all, and it all went down again. So that's why we had to have a rebroadcast yesterday, and I apologize for that. There were a lot of things we wanted to talk about relative to Memorial Day and proper respect and recognition of our serving military, even as we come to understand that they are not actually fighting and dying for what they have been told they are fighting and dying for, but that is no reason to disrespect those who wear the uniform anymore. Ooh, and I see the hackers are back attacking my web server right on time, so we must be over the target if they're that angry with me. Quick little program note, next Monday, June 5th, Gilad Otzman is going to be our on-air guest talking about his recent concert tour, his recent lecture tour, his new book out here, Being in Time. It's actually very intellectually challenging to read, but well worth it. There's a lot of insights in there about what's been going on over the last couple of decades. So we will definitely be looking at that next week here. All right, getting on to the news here. The Seth-Rich story is refusing to go away. It is, in fact, going global. Russia Today is now covering it. NTV, which is a major Russian network, actually covered it. And they even interviewed me for that story, which is amazing because I had no idea I could speak Russian. And it was just amazing to see my face and my mouth moving and hear all these completely unintelligible words come on out. But, you live and you learn. What can I tell you? But it is getting international attention. It's not going away. And the harder they try and slap down on this, the more obvious it is that something is being hidden and they're out there. They're desperate to try and make this thing going away. And we have to be very careful of deliberately planted false information to try and trip us up. And I sort of have a question mark over this story. Apparently, there's a claim that there's a leaked FBI memo confirming that he had the DNC emails on his laptop and ties with WikiLeaks. Now, a lot of people are already saying the memo is a fake. It's hard to know. It's certainly consistent with the story that's come on out so far that the police had Seth Rich's laptop. They could not get into it because of the security. They enlisted the FBI to get into the laptop. So the FBI has the contents of the laptop, and nobody's saying anything, oh, it's all gone away, it's lost, we don't know where it went here. But Kim.com, who is facing extradition to the United States over intellectual property violations, is communicating with his lawyer saying he is willing to provide the evidence that Seth Rich was the DNC leaker, as long as he is allowed to do so in a way that does not interfere with his attempts to resist extradition. So, given what may lie at the heart of this whole hacking email scandal, I don't think a deal will be made. Because if what I think happened with Hillary's private email server actually did happen, nobody in the government wants this to become public because the scandal would destroy the central federal government. A serving Secretary of State selling out her country to foreign interests using that weak email server to deliver the goods and that charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments. When you look at how hard they're working to keep this story under wraps, you know there is something really nasty being protected. From the corporate media's point of view, of course, and from Hillary's campaign and the DNC, they've been pushing the Russia hacked the DNC narrative for months now. And if it were to come on out that this was a complete fabrication, and there is no evidence to support it, that's another blow against their credibility. Now, Sean Hannity is apparently in the crosshairs now for having talked about this story of Seth Rich being the source of the DNC emails to WikiLeaks. And remember, when you look at all the DNC, John Podesta, Hillary Clinton emails that WikiLeaks let out, they all end at the time Seth Rich was killed. And that's a very significant giveaway. Now, there are a lot of other people who are out there floating possible alternative motives for the assassination of Seth Rich. Before we get into those, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates, just now rejoining our network. And these alternative theories may be an effort to try and say, well, it wasn't really the DNC leak. He was killed because of blah, 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 blah. But there may actually be multiple overlapping agendas, as often happens in assassination. And if the DNC leak story is true, it doesn't mean these others aren't. They could all be true. And that would certainly build a very powerful motive for wanting Seth Rich to assume room temperature. Apparently there is a lawsuit called Johnson versus Edison Media that involved the rigging of the DNC exit polls during the primaries. Now, the case didn't go anywhere because apparently their key witness was going to be Seth Rich. Now, there's another story, this is coming out of Investment Watch blog, where apparently Seth Rich's girlfriend is saying that Seth Rich had discovered a way that the primary votes were being stolen from Bernie Sanders and given to Hillary Clinton. And the way it worked was rather simple. Hillary's people set up their own polling places, and the addresses of those polling places were sent out to known Hillary supporters through this smartphone application written by Seth Rich. The problem was they weren't really the official polling places. That was a separate list that went out to the Bernie supporters. And what happened at the end of the day is they would go into these duplicate polling places where Hillary supporters had voted. They would take those ballots. They would then take them over to the other polling places, and they would swap Bernie Sanders votes for Hillary votes. And the logs would all line up. There would be just as many votes as there were registered voters in the logs. And then they would simply destroy the Bernie Sanders votes and the alternative logs. And everything would line up in the bookkeeping. And this is the reason why we saw so many precincts saying that there were fewer voters than expected. Because this scam was carving out large numbers of Bernie Sanders voters and rendering them invisible. And according to this story coming from the girlfriend, we think, no confirmation yet, Seth Rich didn't realize that there was this parallel voting place scam going on until the day he himself voted. And that's when he began to realize he'd been part of a large scam. That would have certainly been a powerful motive for him to decide that he needed to correct an egregious wrong, which he was inadvertently made a part of. Meanwhile, the Democrats have launched a classic blame the witness smear campaign. There's all these anonymous Democratic operatives all over Twitter and social media saying, well, you can't listen to anything about Seth Rich. He was a heroin user. He was a druggie. He was all these bad things. If you look at a picture of Seth Rich, I mean, it's a happy-go-lucky guy, wears red, white, and blue, you know, very much in love with the image of America. And he certainly does not look like a heroin user. For one thing, he's a little overweight. And heroin users tend to be very, very slender and skinny. And so, again, it's just a smear job. And it just shows how desperate and scared they are that this is starting to gain traction in the global media and among the American population. Now, a lot of people have come forward with offers of rewards for information leading to the arrest of the killers or the plotters behind Seth Rich's assassination. And right now it's totaling almost $250,000 out there, just waiting to be had by somebody to blow the whistle on what happened and who was behind it. Meanwhile, looking back at some of the other strange deaths here, we need to look back at this lawsuit against the DNC that was filed June of last year. Attorneys Jared Beck and Elizabeth Beck of law firm Beck and Lee filed a class action lawsuit against the DNC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And the suit claimed that the DNC acted against its own charter by showing demonstrable bias toward Hillary Clinton in the primary, as well as failing to secure the data of the DNC donors. Now, the suit could have had massive significance for the Democratic Party had it gone forward to court before the election. But then the gentleman who served the lawsuit and was part of the lawsuit, Sean Lucas, he died under very questionable circumstances. And all of these deaths, you can all say, oh, this is a coincidence, that's a coincidence. There are simply too many of them. And that was basically the gist of the NTV story. There is a clear, obvious pattern of people who are threats to the deep state meeting untimely ends. Now, getting on to global terrorism here, we are starting to see the official story around the Manchester bombing continue to unravel. And the latest is coming out of Blacklisted News. Apparently, the FBI knew that Salman Abedi was plotting an attack, and they warned the British authorities, who took no action to stop it. Remember, last week we found out that Salman's own friends were calling the terror hotline and saying, this guy is dangerous, and he was not even under surveillance. Looking into his background, it turns out that he and his father were part of a British-supported jihadi group in Libya working against Gaddafi. So more and more this guy is looking like he was an intelligence asset who was set up as a patsy. And it does happen all the time. Lee Harvey Oswald, a good example. The Tsarnaev brothers is another one. And apparently this morning there was another attempted terror attack in Paris. It was foiled. 2 people have been arrested. And hopefully these people are going to provide information on just who it is they are really working for, which will never be provided to the public. Oh, it's this, it's that. Everybody fighting agendas, dueling agendas here. Let's turn to the White House. As you know, the Trump-Russia ties meme is enjoying a renaissance, not because of Donald Trump or because of Putin, but because of Jared Kushner. And it's beginning to look like Jared was engaged in a little bit of inappropriate behavior. Apparently he was in a meeting with the head of one of the Russian banks currently under U.S. sanctions. And the story, at least reported by Reuters, is saying that the head of this bank told Jared Kushner that if Jared Kushner could arrange for the sanctions to be lifted, the Russian bank would be willing to finance some of Trump Enterprises and Jared Kushner's activities. Now, Jared Kushner himself, he's had a couple of major business failings. He's heavily in debt. It's hard for him to get credit to try and pick himself up again. So this would have been very attractive to him. The question is, was Jared doing this all on his own? Did Trump know? And if not, again, this is just Jared going out on his own. And from the indications inside the White House, that seems to be what happened. Jared was out there trying to make a deal on his own, and now all of a sudden he's getting a huge pushback in the White House away from Donald Trump. People are talking about the return of Steve Bannon as Trump's top advisor. Over in Vanity Fair, they even have an article, is a previously unfathomable rift opening up between Jared Kushner and Trump? And is Trump moving away from being a father-in-law to being the President of the United States of America, which would be a very, very healthy thing? Because Jared Kushner is very pro-war, pro-Israel. A lot of people were very concerned that he seemed to have the ear of Donald Trump, and now it looks like that may be fading. And that would be a very good thing. Now, what Kushner did is inappropriate, and it should be looked into for possible criminal violations. But again, those who are saying, oh, it proves that Trump is this and Trump is that, you're being very, very selective. Because there's a story that came out of Wall Street on Parade pointing out that Wall Street funds hold hundreds of millions of dollars of funds from those sanctioned Russian banks that are currently being investigated in connection with the Kushner probe. It's not like an either-or. A lot of people were doing business with Russia before Russia was designated our new Cold War enemy. Back when we were all still friends, buddy-buddy, everybody was doing business back and forth. That's what peace is supposed to be, peace through commerce. And a lot of these business arrangements are a little bit difficult to extricate from, especially with all the sanctions and everything else going on. So there's a lot of people who have business ties to Russia. Doesn't necessarily mean there's anything nefarious. It's just a reality of all of a sudden Russia went from being our good friend and ally to our despicable enemy. Pretty much around the same time that Putin took direct government control of Russia's central bank, and that's when he was moved to the top of the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. Now, surprising resignation. We're hearing more and more rumblings about leakers being identified, about Trump's dissatisfaction with his current staff. I noticed on the press briefing today, Sean Spicer is back in the saddle as the White House press spokesman. There was rumors that he was going to leave. Apparently that's not happening. He's now back in the saddle, and it looks to me like he's doing a good job handling a very adversarial media. But apparently White House Communications Director Mike Rivero has resigned after just 3 months on the job, and just a week after Trump came back from his international tour. Now, whether Mike was part of the leaks or there's something else going on, we don't know. But one thing is becoming very, very obvious. Donald Trump brought that "you're fired" button with him to the White House. And he's sending out a message very clearly that people who are not loyal to him, people who are trying to sell him some other party's agenda, they could very easily get a pink slip. I would like to see the Donald Trump that we all thought we voted for start to emerge from his little chrysalis. Time will tell whether that's actually going to happen, if he's trying to strain at the leashes that have been put on him. Sean Hannity, speaking of Sean Hannity again, he's out there saying this whole Russia collusion narrative is crumbling, and it is. They have zero evidence for it. The entire case about Russian collusion was based, first of all, on that now discredited dossier of Donald Trump and the prostitutes in the hotel in Moscow doing icky things to the linens. And the other one, of course, especially the DNC hacking the Russian servers, all came from this one company called CrowdStrike that was hired by the DNC to look at the servers, and they came on out and said, oh, yes, it had to be Russia. There was no confirmation. No U.S. government agency, FBI, NSA, CIA, were ever allowed to conduct a forensic analysis on that server. CrowdStrike has now backed off and abandoned the claim and saying, no, we didn't really find anything at all. And they are refusing to cooperate with congressional investigators looking into this. So at this point, there is zero evidence of Russia-Trump collusion. There is zero evidence of Russia hacking the DNC, and that is why they are so scared of the Seth Rich story. Because if it does come on out incontrovertibly that Seth Rich was that DNC leak, then it destroys the credibility of the corporate media, who's been pushing Russian hacker, Russian hacker, Russian hacker. It destroys the credibility of the Hillary Clinton campaign, that's been pushing Russian hacker. And by the way, if you notice, she's risen from the grave again. She's out there. And, of course, the DNC as a whole. So there we are. John Podesta is out there accusing Sean Hannity of colluding with Russia. Don't believe anything that they're saying. They're colluding with Russia. They're trying to revive that arm of Russian propaganda meme that they had out there for all of us in the independent media. Now then, there's been another child porn scandal. This one is really icky. Jacob Schwartz is the president of the Manhattan Young Democrats, and he works for Mayor Bill de Blasio's administration. He was arrested last Thursday. Apparently he had thousands of child pornography images and videos on his laptop, and the descriptions of some of them are really disgusting, and I'm not going to go into the detail, except that I have to ask, how do these sickos get into positions of power? Is nobody really vetting these people for psychological aberration, or is that maybe part of the job requirement so that you can be blackmailed and controlled? This is really disgusting stuff if you read the story. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to take a couple of phone calls. Lou in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Guten Morgen, Mike.
Wie geht's es Ihnen? What's on your mind today?
Yes, Mike. I don't know. I guess you may have heard that last week at a commencement speech at a graduation class. I don't know which college or university it was out in the country, over here in the country, that Hillary, Madame Hillary, was invited to give a commencement speech. And that was at work when I saw this on the news and stuff, and, I just rolled my eyes, and I just almost wanted to throw up, man. I just said, golly, no shame. What a national disgrace.
Yes.
If I would have been receiving a diploma from that college, Mike, I would have refused the diploma. I couldn't believe it. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I heard about it.
Yeah, I really don't want to know what college or university this
Well,
was.
she's trying to come back into public life. She did the commencement speech. Apparently, she or her body double marched in one of these Memorial Day parades yesterday, wearing the blue sunglasses.
Oh man, unbelievable, Mike. Yeah, I'm thinking, I even told my wife, man, what country what other university out in the world would allow such a criminal, a psychopath, and a traitor to go up and deliver a commencement speech like that? Yeah. Geez, Mike.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, anyway, hi guys, how was your Memorial Day weekend?
Well, like I said, we had an inadvertent day off yesterday. Claire and I basically just rested and slept a lot because we've been running on the edge of exhaustion for the last month or so, and so it was a chance to catch up on our sleep and our energy, and we're feeling a lot better today. So that's basically all that we did.
All right, Mike. Well, yeah, happy Memorial Day and stuff. I'm gonna be working on my train set too and stuff. So
that sounds like
care,
fun.
Okay?
That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Alex in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I was wondering why Kim.com couldn't take his evidence in case to another country's court or the world court to prove that it was actually Seth Rich that uploaded the documents that WikiLeaks received.
I'm not sure that Kim.com would have standing to bring the case in any court outside the jurisdiction of the United States of America in order to present his evidence. Basically, he wants to find a way to get his evidence to the congressional investigators, and apparently part of it is personal testimony on his relationship with Seth Rich and his participation in the forwarding of information to WikiLeaks. Frankly, I think he could testify over video. That's certainly not been unheard of in congressional investigations. But again, he wants to get this evidence out there, and apparently a lot of it, again, is just his personal testimony. Otherwise, if it was actual records, computer data, he could just send it along.
You don't think that that Seth Rich used his mega upload to upload some of the files that went to WikiLeaks?
Well, actually, I think most of it was being passed by hand on flash drives because of the awareness of how deeply the Internet is being surveilled. And apparently there were one or two cutouts where Seth Rich would hand a flash drive to one person, they'd hand it to another, they'd hand it to another, and then it got into the hands of WikiLeaks that way. I'm sure Seth Rich was aware to the extent of over and above NSA spying. We now know Hillary Clinton had spyware on all of her own staff computers. She was spying on all of them. I'm totally paranoid. And Seth Rich would be in a position to have known that was what was going on. So we had to be very careful about, first of all, making copies of the DNC emails without being detected, and certainly not put them on an open Internet where they would be immediately spotted. So, yeah, it was handed off with flash drives.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to take a break.
And one more thing, Michael. Another thing is that the DNC server should also have evidence of who uploaded those files.
Well, the DNC won't let anybody look at them. We got to let you go for a commercial break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before I take this next phone call, I was looking at the Fox News feed, and they were running this banner story about basically how the mainstream media reported on Trump's meeting with Pope Francis. In other words, they're not really reporting on Trump's meeting with Pope Francis. They're reporting on themselves. They're trying to make the mainstream media the story. Talk about self-aggrandizement and an overinflated sense of one's place in the universe. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Joe in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'm a big Trump supporter, but I want to go back in time a little bit. The last time I really was happy politically was when the Republicans won the House in 1994 after a couple of years of Bill Clinton with Waco, and it wasn't, but I remember the Vince Foster thing coming out before that election, and I sent money to the Republicans, and I told them when I sent money, I said, you have to investigate Vince Foster. You can destroy the Clinton presidency by doing that, and they never did a darn thing about it. And really, I just basically with 9/11, I got way out of the politics. I voted for Bush because I wanted, non-interventionism, and then I get a false flag and war all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, that goes all the way back to Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson campaigned on keeping the United States out of the European war, and then, of course, he gets elected. They do that thing with the Lusitania smuggling weapons to Great Britain, and all of a sudden we're in World War I. So it's hardly new. Presidents will lie and trick you to get you into war. The reason the Republicans never looked into the death of Vince Foster is because both the Clintons and the Bushes are actually very close allies. They may be in different political parties for the sake of the TV cameras and the elections, but they're actually very tightly aligned together around that CIA cocaine smuggling operation, which has basically corrupted America's politics going back 30 years. And nobody wants to get into anything that is going to risk that because, again, that is a great secret that would bring the entire government down. If the American people ever woke up and realized that, yes, the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the U.S. government itself, they're not going to sit still for that. They're absolutely not going to. So anything that gets close to that flow of cocaine money out of Arkansas in the 1980s, even the Clintons' worst enemies are working to keep a lid on that story because they're looking out for their own continued positions of power, prestige, and wealth.
Well, my father used to say it was because of the FBI files. Remember that happened around 1994 also. And it was really made a story to let everybody know. It was one of those stories that the Clintons liked getting out there because it showed it let all their opponents realize that they have the goods on everybody in Congress. But the thing that is upsetting me with Trump and why I'm having flashbacks is I really worked hard for Trump. I mean, I really did what I could. I sent money. I was on the computer all the time. And he has this Seth Rich and this whole Russia thing being served up to him on a platter. And if he doesn't take this club and hit them over the head with it, I don't know what to do. I sit here and cheer for the man, but it's like he's allowing himself to be hamstrung. I just don't understand it. If he's for real, he's going to use this club and destroy the Democratic Party and the Clinton machine. If he isn't, then it's not going to happen. So I don't know what else to say except I'm getting very, very frustrated.
Well, Joe, again, right now, President Trump, and I'll be the first to say I'm very disappointed in him. I worked very hard, not so much for Trump, but against Hillary. And I'm when Trump won the election, I thought, it really is a new beginning for the country, and obviously that has not transpired. But again, you're forgetting that anything connected with the Clintons and the Bushes has that built-in self-destruct device, which is exposing this corrupted core of the deep state, which could bring the entire government down. Now, right now, Donald Trump is the president, and I am going to assume that he is thinking he's president of the entire country, Republican and Democrat. And so, yes, there would certainly be a partisan motive and even a little bit of vengeance to go after the Seth Rich case and embarrass the DNC. But again, he risks exposure of a scandal that could bring the entire government down around him. I mean, that is how monstrous all of this really is. If it were all to come on out, Donald Trump would be the last president of the United States of America, and I don't think he wants that on his resume. And again, let me give you another example. Back when John F. Kennedy got assassinated, and Lyndon Johnson knew what was going on, and he knew that if he just went along with the agenda, there would be war with Cuba and war with Russia. So he concocted the crazed lone nut assassin basically to keep the United States from getting into a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And we may not agree with his deception and cover-up, but you have to understand he really was operating from a very, very good motive. And Donald Trump may be in a position where his advisors are telling him, if you open up this can of worms, the whole government will come crashing down. And Trump is probably thinking, for the good of the nation as a whole, yeah, I got to go along with this. So I certainly don't think Donald Trump was part of the assassination of Seth Rich. He certainly was a victim of it, as it was revealed by the WikiLeaks emails that he was a victim of massive election fraud. But again, as president, he's got to take the big picture. He's got to take the wide view, and I suspect, I mean, it's not like Trump has ever called me up and said, hi, this is what I'm doing. I think he's trying to start to maintain a larger overview of the nation as a whole, which is exactly what we want the president to be doing.
Yeah, but meanwhile, they're trying to destroy him. It's like a bunch of jackals. I think that he has to fight. I mean, they're going to destroy him if he doesn't fight and fight hard. I mean, I think that's what you're seeing in Bannon coming back and Kushner and Ivanka going back to New York. They tried to talk to him to be nice and to make nice with people, and then look how he had it thrown in his face. So I think that basically when I say to do this, I'm not looking forward to the fact that the dollar will go down and our, all these institutions will be brought low, but at the same time, we can't just let them maintain their corrupt power or the country's going down anyway, and besides the fact that we need justice. I want to see justice for these criminals.
I absolutely do too. I mean, after all these years, and the loss of my career in Hollywood, I dream of somebody coming on up and saying, well, we apologize for wrecking your life over the Vince Foster case. It's never going to happen, but it's a pleasant fiction. Again, Trump may be starting to assert his independence, and he's going to have to play it very, very carefully because he does know that if he annoys too many blocks of power, that he could be killed, because that is a reality. I think if Donald Trump were to get involved in the Seth Rich case, the corporate media would excoriate him for partisan rumor mongering. And so what we're going to have to do is hopefully Kim.com will be able to present his evidence. I mean, at this point, any reasonable person looking at the evidence around the Seth Rich case is that, yes, he was the DNC leaker. Russia had nothing to do with it. Nobody can prove that. There's considerable evidence that Seth Rich was the leaker. And obviously, he was not killed as a part of a robbery because he still had his wallet, watch, and cell phone. So any reasonable person looking at it, there's a very compelling circumstantial case. Seth Rich was the DNC leaker, and he was killed for it. And we all know it, and that's almost as good as having the government come out and admit it. In fact, it doesn't really matter what the government says anymore anyway. It doesn't matter what Hillary says. We all know that she's lying. It doesn't matter what the DNC says. We know they're lying. It doesn't matter what the corporate media says. We know they're lying. We have evolved an American population that is learning and deciding for themselves what is really going on, and that is the first step toward returning to be a truly free and independent people, thinking for ourselves.
Well, I'd like to see some of these institutions start doing some house cleaning themselves. I mean, you could have an organized crime family, and if the head, the capo de tutti frutti, is embarrassing the family, they'll take care of that themselves. And I think that has to happen in the CIA and the FBI, and some of these corrupt families need to have an accident, if you know what I mean. Just if they want to keep this country and keep the institutions relevant, they're going to have to do something about this corruption sooner or later. It's just it's out of control.
Well, at this point, I think we're past the point of no return. I've been waiting for over 20 years to see any indications within any government agencies of a strong move to restore the republic, and it just seems the corruption gets worse and worse, and I'm still convinced that if we just wait patiently and we do not resort to violence, that the system is going to tear itself apart the way the former Soviet Union did. We're seeing a badly factionalized government. We've got a story a little bit further where we've got legislators threatening to kill each other over their contrasting agendas. We're seeing a government that is badly factionalized. The NSA's gone rogue. CIA went rogue decades ago. The Pentagon seems to be going rogue. And it's fragmenting before our very eyes. And all the economic experts are saying there's going to be a major financial upheaval, and we could see the whole shebang come crashing down. Like the former Soviet Union, it's going to be very, very hard for ordinary Americans to get through, I would say 3 to 4 months, while we put together a new republic in this land. And then life will be better for us than it was before. And that is our best option right now.
Well, like I said, I was hoping Trump was going to govern more as a fighter like he campaigned, and I think he's going to have to survive his presidency.
I agree with you on that one. I agree with you on that one. I think the ejection of Kushner and the bringing back of Bannon is a good sign. I've seen a few small indications that Donald Trump is trying to become the Donald Trump that he sold us last year. But he is surrounded by that deep state. He's surrounded by the neocons. And they've probably got him convinced that if the war agenda doesn't move forward, there'll be an economic collapse, whereas we all know it's going to happen anyway. But again, all paths forward lead to the destruction of the United States of America.
Yeah. Well, hey, one other thing. You know, I sat on my computer in Florida like 10 years ago, ready to buy Bitcoin.
Yep.
And I didn't do it, and I'm kicking myself in the butt ever since. I just couldn't understand how it could be virtual currency, and I bought gold and silver instead, and I don't regret it, because gold and silver has something tangible behind it. But to me, it's still a sign of the insanity that it could be at $2,000 a Bitcoin.
It took a big hit last week. A lot of people are saying that the bubble has burst on that, and it may be heading back down again.
To me, it's a sign of the insanity in the financial system. I'm sorry to any Bitcoin promoters, and I know there's a lot on the right because it really got started through I heard about it on different, internet radio shows, and I wish all those people all the happiness of the world, but I just can't understand it. It just seems like everything around is just based on bullshit, excuse my French. But anyway, thanks for listening to me, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, as you know, Donald Trump has formed a Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, and apparently they're already hard at work. You're not going to see this in the corporate media, but apparently they already did a study over in Virginia, and they found at least 5,000 non-U.S. citizens registered to vote in Virginia. So they're starting to find stuff. They're starting to actually dig all of this information out. And again, the corporate media does not want to talk about anything to do with election fraud because they are part of the problem. We're going to take another phone call. Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Speaking of election fraud, did you ever get a chance to read those transcripts from the Bernie Sanders lawsuit?
No, unfortunately, I didn't. Is that Bernie Sanders' own lawsuit or the class action?
No, it's the class action. And it's the class action lawsuit. The DNC doesn't even deny that they, did rig the election. What's really just developed last week, I forget the guy's name, one of the prosecuting attorneys woke up dead. So, I think this is a major story.
You're talking about the guy down on the beach. You're talking about the guy down on the beach in Florida.
I believe so. Yeah,
he was shot in the head, and let me get his name up here again. Let's see. Here we go. He was a federal prosecutor. He was looking into visa fraud. And apparently he was also looking into an a postal vote fraud case where apparently somebody in his district where he was, which is Debbie Wasserman Schultz's district, had been stealing and destroying Bernie Sanders' absentee ballots. And he was looking into that as well.
Then then goes back to the Wasserman Schultz laptop, which is in the possession of the Capitol Police, that the gentleman whose laptop it is, once he realized that it was in the possession of the police, immediately fled the country. I think he was, I'm quoting enough, I think he was an Algerian working for W. Wasserman Schultz in the DNC.
Yeah.
As soon as he found out, there's major information on that laptop, and this is all tied back together with not so much the election fraud and the general election, primaries, and how they stole this from Bernie Sanders. Because apparently, from what I understand, from Jared Beck, the lead attorney against the DNC, this shows all their tricks. This shows everything that they do. This is looking behind the magician's curtain. And I don't know how it's not on the front page of every newspaper in the country.
Well, because unfortunately much of the corporate media is still very much in alignment with the liberal agenda, and thou shalt not say anything bad about any liberal, and thou shalt not say anything good about any conservative. Seems to be their editorial policy at this point. Anyway, we're talking about Branton J. Wisenant, Jr., and he was found floating in the water with a gunshot to his head, Hollywood Beach. And as of the last word, again, like Seth Rich, he still had his wallet, still had his watch, still had his cell phone. Apparently, at last word, it is being treated as a suspicious death.
Well, that's a plus. I mean, at least it's not being written off as a robbery or something like that. I hope that they continue that prosecution. And with this guy, Jared Beck, I mean, this guy he's an ace. I mean, he's a liberal. He's a true liberal. And all he wants is fair elections and fairness and things of that nature. I've seen a bunch of interviews with him. I don't know, it might be someone with a similar friend. But, yeah, I mean, when you hear him explain some of the reasons that the DNC has to throw out this fraudulent case, it's, that
yeah, their attitude is we're allowed to do this and you're not allowed to complain. Anyway, Kyle, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're actually going to take just one more phone call, and then we're going to close the lines for a little while because I have so much news built up over this last weekend here. So, James in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, I wanted to talk about how you were talking about the big secret with the whole drug running and everything, and even going back to Arkansas Times and even Woodrow Wilson. It really it all just turns to Israel. Israel and their domination of all the Western politics and nations.
That's a bit of a stretch there. I mean, yes, we know that Israel...
Really?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a stretch. Israel loves to get involved in other people's governments and cause a great deal of trouble. But in terms of the Iran-Contra operation, Israel doesn't seem to have had a huge amount to do with that. It was basically George Herbert Walker Bush's CIA, remember he was the former director, and they were playing the same regime change program we have been seeing. It's much more exposed and visible today, but they've been doing it all the way back at least to the end of World War II. Now, hang on a minute, okay? Yes, Israel's government has done a lot of bad things, but let's not just go on out there and try and say Israel's government is to blame for everything, because they're not. There are a lot of evil people in the world who are not part of Israel's government. There are a lot of evil people in the world who are part of the United States government. So let's be fair and honest and balanced and objective about this. What became known as the Iran-Contra scandal appears to have been completely internal to the CIA, trying to interfere in Nicaragua to help the Contras overthrow the Sandinistas, and they were sending them covert arms manufactured with lower receivers without serial numbers, so they couldn't be traced. And because this was an illegal covert operation under the Boland Amendment and the Logan Act, they had to fund it some other way than asking Congress for the money. And so they did it by smuggling drugs back into the United States. And it wasn't the first time. The CIA was caught smuggling heroin into the U.S. all the way back during Vietnam. But this was all internal to the CIA, and Israel's government really did not have a whole heck of a lot to do with any of that. And it's also not accurate to say that Woodrow Wilson somehow part of this, because no, that was a completely separate issue.
You're right in that point, but just like AIPAC, the Progress for the New American Century, it was dual citizens from Israel and America that were working, making up, because at the end of the day, it all benefited Israel. Everything
James, the Project for the New American Century came along after the Arkansas.
Who wrote it?
It was the neocons, but you've got your timeline is kind of messed up. Anyway, James, we're going to let you go.
Yeah, but who are the neocons?
We're coming up on the top of the show and our station identification, and we're going to close the phone lines for a while here to get some news on out here. Now, as you know, there are a lot of new startup social media companies trying to gain a foothold as public distrust of the established social media is starting to grow. They're struggling. Not all of them are making it. There was a rival to Reddit called Voat, and it looks like they are probably going to have to shut down because of money problems. And we're sorry to see them go. We need more social media platforms in order to counter censorship. We'll be back after station identification. And hello, hi America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 2. We're going to close the phone lines for a while here because I really got a lot of news I need to get through here. Now then, turning over to Syria. A lot of interesting things starting to happen in Syria. Apparently the Tiger forces have prevailed against ISIS in Aleppo, making huge gains there. The Syrian government troops have taken back the Damascus-Palmyra road for the first time since this war began. That is a major, major communication path. If you look at a map of Syria, and you'll see all these maps out there about here is ISIS, and here are the U.S.-backed moderates, and here's the Turkish forces, and here are the Syrian forces. Forget about the volume of the map. Much of what ISIS, in theory, controls is just empty desert. You need to look at the lines of communication, because controlling those lines of communication is what determines who is really winning and losing the wars, and that's why this is an important story. Another story coming out of Syria Direct, U.S.-backed rebels losing territory in East Syrian desert to the regime. Things are happening very, very rapidly over there. Hasht al-Sha'abi reaches the northern Syria border. And control of those borders is very, very important as well. Those are the transit points to get material, men, supplies in and out of the country. The U.S. and Britain have been forced to withdraw some of their forces from the Al-Tanf border crossing in southern Syria and moving them back into Jordan. So, needless to say, the U.S. government is now worried about the Syrian army's rapid advances toward the borders with Iraq and Jordan because, gosh darn it, that's where we're going to carve out the new Kurdistan. How dare they do it? And you want to talk about the arrogance of power. The U.S.-led coalition is now calling on pro-Assad forces to leave the Syrian-Iraq border. They basically dropped a bunch of pamphlets all over the pro-Assad forces saying, get on out of here, you don't have a right to be here. If you threaten the people we're supporting, we will attack you. And the response from the Syrian army bordered on laughter, especially that part about you have no right to be there. Hey, it's our country, and you are not welcome here. You don't have permission to be here. But what we're seeing is a rapid escalation at that Syrian-Iraq border, which could lead to a standoff between U.S. Special Forces and Syria's Arab army. So it's getting very, very hot, especially around Al-Tanf. That's the new hotspot. Now, over in Iraq, Secretary General of Iraq's Badr organization, Hadi al-Amiri, announced that Hasht al-Sha'abi, which is their popular mobilization force, refuses to let the U.S. Army to take control over even a single inch of Iraq's borders with Syria. All of a sudden, Iraq and Syria share a common agenda. We are going to take care of our borders ourselves. And apparently, Iraq's paramilitary is also advancing toward the Syrian border. Try and clean out all these U.S.-backed forces or ISIS, whoever's there. So it looks like there is a change in the dynamic there. Now, France is now preparing a pro-Al-Qaeda intervention in Syria. France is going to go on into Syria, and they're going to bomb the Syrian forces in support of Al-Qaeda. This despite all these terror attacks that are happening inside France right now. Doesn't really seem to make a huge amount of sense anywhere. Meanwhile, the European Union has decided to extend their sanctions against Assad's regime for an additional year because of the repression of civilians. Oh my goodness, they're repressing their civilians. If you want to talk about repressed civilians, come to the United States of America. They've all but shredded the Bill of Rights. Now, here's the bottom line. The United States of America does not have Syria's permission to be in Syria. Syria did not invite them, does not want them. The U.S. keeps going into Syria. They've got boots on the ground, U.S. Special Forces. They're flying air missions which they claim are against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but seem to hit Syrian critical economic and military infrastructure. All of this is illegal under international law. It's illegal under U.S. law. There's no congressional declaration of a war against Syria. There is no UN Security Council resolution authorizing any of this. This is just the United States as aggressor in yet another country. Now, Moscow is expressing concern over the fact that the U.S. government is now issuing threats against Syria's armed forces. We're not talking ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We're talking the government of the United States of America's military is threatening the government of Syria's military inside Syria. And apparently it's all, again, it's focusing on that Al-Tanaf, on the border between Syria and Iraq. That's the new hotspot. Keeping an eye on that one. We're going to be doing a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, Mad Dog Mattis is out there saying that despite the threats by the U.S. against Syria's forces, that really we're just focused on the annihilation of ISIS. And, yeah, there's been a lot of civilian casualties. It's just a fact of life we're all going to have to accept. Yes, it's terrible, but just get used to it. The U.S. government is going to be killing civilians in all these countries they're trying to invade. And it's really kind of weird to see, because civilian deaths are a fact of life when the U.S. are causing them. But boy, if it's Russia and Syria killing civilians, oh my goodness, look what they did at Idlib. Look what the Russians are doing. It's horrible, all those dead civilians. What about the civilians the U.S. are killing? The U.S. is killing more civilians than Russia is. Well, that's just a fact of life. If you're a loyal American, you won't see the dead civilians we killed. You'll only see the dead civilians the Russians and the Syrians killed. Proving once again it is a wild card in this game, Turkey is now refusing to grant Germans access to the Incirlik air base. There's been a war of words building between Turkey and Germany, with Germany saying they're just going to pull out of Incirlik completely. Turkey is saying good riddance, goodbye. And that, of course, will require Germany to find some other friendly air base in the region to take part in their bombing of Syria's infrastructure. Now, there's been an alarming development that we need to pay attention to. And this story came out of Blacklisted News. Actually, it's been in a couple of different places. Shifting the blame for 9/11. And basically what it is, as you know, there was this ridiculous lawsuit that said Iran is responsible for 9/11, therefore the families of the victims of 9/11 can sue Iran for compensation. It was a true finding by the court. Now, true finding is when the judge says, we think this is what happened, and we don't have to show you any proof because, after all, I'm a judge. Which, by the way, is not in the Constitution. And so now they're trying to take the existence of this lawsuit to basically start building a case in the minds of the American people that Iran really was behind 9/11 all this time. Oh, yes, we were wrong to say that if Afghanistan did 9/11 and bombed their country to rubble. Yes, we were wrong to say that Iraq was behind 9/11 and bombed their country to rubble. But you can trust us now when we tell you that Iran was behind 9/11. So they're getting ready to dust off 9/11. There's been rumblings of trying to blame Saudi Arabia for it. And Saudi Arabia may have been involved as a cooperating with U.S. intelligence agencies, but they certainly did not initiate it for reasons we've talked about many, many times before. So now it's Iran. Next, they're going to say that Russia had something to do with 9/11. China had something to do with 9/11. It's their one-stop excuse. Oh, where we've now got new evidence that this country was involved in 9/11, therefore we have to go bomb them. Apparently, the Israeli cabinet decided to hold a meeting in the tunnels underneath the Al-Aqsa compound. Needless to say, the Palestinians are saying this is clearly a provocation, and yes, it is. It's symbolizing how Israel wants Jerusalem as their capital, including the Temple Mount. And if you've ever seen documentaries about those tunnels underneath that platform, they're not comfortable. It's not a good place to be holding a meeting. It was done to basically mark their turf. Now, here's an article that came out of Aleppo News that makes a very, very valid point. By definition, an aggressor cannot act in defense. And they're taking Israel to task for always explaining the bombings of Gaza and the West Bank by saying they're acting in defense of their country. No, they're not. They're going into other people's countries. And they set up a rather interesting little metaphor that if the United States annexed, occupied, and started building illegal settlements in Cuba, the U.S. does not have a right to claim it is defending itself when the Cubans act against U.S. aggression. International law sets a clear model for the dynamics of the situation. The country that is moving into somebody else's country is the aggressor. The country being moved into is the defender. And that applies to the United States versus Cuba or any of these other countries the U.S. is invading, and it certainly applies to Israel and Palestine. If you look at the maps of Israel from its founding to today, you see constant expansion, constant acquisition of other people's territory. Israel is the aggressor. The United States is the aggressor. The other countries are defending themselves, and they have every legal and moral right to do so, including North Korea. Now, the U.S. now has 3 carrier battle groups off the coast of North Korea, the Carl Vinson, the Nimitz, and the Ronald Reagan, the only carrier that glows in the dark. And North Korea is clearly accelerating their preparations to defend themselves against attack. Apparently, they had a successful test of a new anti-aircraft artillery piece that has now been ordered into production, and they've tested another ballistic missile. Now, there's a story that came out over the weekend, and I'm going to stress up front, there is no confirmation for it yet. But I feel it's worth a mention. This is coming out of Novorossiya. Apparently, SEAL Team 6 had been infiltrated into North Korea using the USS Michigan. Now, we talked about the Michigan before. The USS Michigan is a converted Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine. It's been converted to what's called a guided missile submarine, where they take the 24 tubes that held the Trident missiles. 2 of them were converted to lockout chambers for divers for covert missions, and the remaining 22 tubes have multiple vertical launch tubes with either Standard or Tomahawk cruise missiles in them. It carries one heck of a wallop, and it too is off the coast of North Korea. So the South Korean news had reported on how the USS Michigan had been up along the coast of North Korea. Obviously, the U.S. government doesn't say where those things are going. But apparently, the reports are coming out of Novorossiya is there was a SEAL Team 6 in North Korea, apparently in company with their South Korean counterparts, elite forces, on a reconnaissance mission with intimations of possibly an attempt at an assassination of Kim Jong-un. Apparently, they quite by accident stumbled into a major patrol, and they got into trouble and were actually forced to break radio silence in order to request assistance. So it was a botched mission. It went horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. And we'll wait to see if North Korea has anything to say about it. Obviously, the U.S. is staying silent about all of this, but it wasn't all that long ago they were talking about a decapitation mission against Kim Jong-un. Now, down in South Korea, their President Moon Jae-in is he's furious. Apparently, the United States deployed 4 additional THAAD missile launchers to South Korea, and President Moon Jae-in was pretty much the last one to know. And he's out there saying, no, the United States does not have our permission to be putting these weapons on our soil. We want them to take all their weapons out. And so President Moon Jae-in has ordered the legislature to start considering legislation to say, U.S. go home, Yankee go home. North Korea is accusing the U.S. of more provocation by sending B-1B Lancer bombers to Seoul. And yes, that's exactly what it is. And upping the ante still further, South Korea's President Moon Jae-in is now saying it's time for a summit with North Korea. He wants to call a meeting, face-to-face, to try and settle this down. Now, obviously, the United States is not going to want this to happen. So, Moon Jae-in, please make sure you're wearing your Kevlar undies, because presidents of nations that do not go along with the U.S. war agenda have a bad habit of falling over dead. Now, the House of Representatives passed a new bill called the North Korea Sanctions and Policy Enhancement Act of 2016. It's now going to the Senate. Russia is saying this basically amounts to an act of war, because among its other provisions is Section 104. This part of the bill says the U.S. now has inspection authority over shipping ports beyond the Korean Peninsula, specifically ports in China, Russia, Syria, and Iran. And I can see why Russia is upset. The U.S. Congress has no authority under the international law to demand inspections inside foreign sovereign territory. They can seek permission by treaty, and diplomatically, let's be nice and make an agreement. But for the Congress to come on out and simply arbitrarily declare that they have authority over these ports in these other countries to have inspections is absolutely ludicrous. Meanwhile, down in the Philippines, it looks like the U.S. is using ISIS to try and take down the government of President Duterte, who refuses to go along with treating drug dealers and drug smugglers with kid gloves. And apparently, it is now getting deadly. Apparently, the official death toll is at least 85. It's probably a lot higher than that. But again, using ISIS as a proxy to bring down a government and replace it with a U.S. proxy. Now, as you know, one of the big things that happened during Trump's tour of Europe is he went and he addressed NATO, and he said NATO has to start paying more of the costs of the alliance. Now, everybody in Europe's always been, eager to be part of NATO because the U.S. is picking up the bills. And being a member nation of NATO means you get all kinds of free stuff. You get tanks and jeeps and bullets and bombs and all kinds of cool stuff. Why wouldn't you want a membership, in a club that gives you all kinds of free things? And Trump is now saying, no, everybody needs to pay a fair share based on their gross domestic product, which means the U.S. would still be paying most of it, but not as much as they have been. And all of a sudden, these NATO member nations are saying, well, if we're not going to get the free stuff, and you're asking us to spend more money on military when we have serious domestic economic difficulties, it may be time for a rethink. And we're already hearing that some of the countries already in NATO are thinking they might be better off getting on out of it. So that may be a strain on that. Now, as you probably already heard, Manuel Noriega, the former leader of Panama, has died in prison, aged 83. Apparently, he was dealing with some serious illnesses and died during his latest treatment. Now, the interesting thing you need to remember, in the original article that they're talking about this in the New York Times, they're talking about that he was tied to drug trafficking in the 1980s. And then, of course, the U.S. invaded and took him out, put him in prison. Well, there's more behind that story. Because remember, in the 1980s, that was when the CIA was running guns down to Nicaragua and bringing cocaine back, and one of the transshipment points, the airports, was in Panama. And Noriega was part of that deal. Then, when Iran-Contra broke, he turned around and tried to blackmail George Bush, saying, unless you give me thus and such kind of money, I will go public and say, yes, all this drug and gun running was going on, and we were all up to our neck in it. And George Bush was not going to be blackmailed, and that's why Panama was invaded, and Noriega was thrown in prison and kept away from the public and press until now, when he has finally passed away. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as long as we're talking about tests of ICBM, today the U.S. military ran another test of their ICBM interceptor, and it was a successful test, which is good because they've had so many failures in the past. But again, we need to be cautious about saying, huzzah, huzzah, we have a working weapon system, because so many military tests tend to be fudged with. And again, I go back to that wonderful book and movie, The Pentagon Wars, about the development of the Bradley Infantry Fighting Vehicle. Now, obviously, in the case of today's test, the defenders firing the anti-ballistic missile weapon, they know when the target is coming in, where it's coming from, what flight path it's going to be on. And that's an advantage that a real attacking enemy is not going to be providing. Plus, we need to remember that the latest generation of Russian and Chinese MIRVs are maneuverable. They do not follow a predictable ballistic missile path. Now, they're making a big point that this ballistic missile intercept test is all about North Korea, and that is true. North Korea's nuclear weapons, reentry vehicles, are not maneuverable to the best of our knowledge. That's where we are on that. Let's turn to the economic news here, and to nobody's surprise, Budget Director Mick Mulvaney is saying that the debt ceiling will have to be raised. They're going to have to increase the borrowing cap. They just can't make their ends meet with all these hideously expensive weapons out there. And Paul Singer's Elliott Management is out there sounding a warning that the current bullish environment on Wall Street is all based on the expectation that Trump's pro-growth agenda is eventually going to succeed. And Paul Singer is saying if it stumbles, if the Fed raises rates, for example, it's going to trigger a major, major upset. There are so many points of vulnerability with our economy. Sooner or later, something has to let go, and all the freshly printed ink and paper isn't going to be able to stop it. Now, right now, over 100 million Americans are somehow dependent on the federal government. And it brings to mind a comment Margaret Thatcher once said, the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. And that's exactly what's wrong with it. For an economy to be healthy, the vast majority of the population must be engaged in productive economic activity. And by productive, I do not mean processing papers and sticking labels on things. I'm talking about manufacturing products other countries want to buy, or growing safe, healthy, organic agricultural produce that other countries want to buy. That's how you do it. You cannot make a prosperous economy just shaking the money back and forth and rigging the rules to make it grow magically. It doesn't work that way. It never, ever has. Now, we know why the government wants more people dependent on the government, because then they're easier to control. If you are dependent on the government for your next meal, you're not going to speak out against the wars, against the corruption. You're not going to question the official story on Seth Rich. We've actually had the government advertising for people to get onto food stamps. Come on over, we'll give you a card, you'll get your food stamps. It'll be wonderful. No, that's dependency. That's enforced dependency, and enforced dependency is a form of slavery. That's what King George III was doing to the American colonies. You were forced to be dependent on the Bank of England for currency borrowed at interest. You were forced to be dependent on the British East India Company for your tea and various other goods. You were forced to buy all your cloth and clothing from the knitting mills in Manchester and Leeds in order to maximize the profitability. The colonials were made dependent on those companies. They were not allowed to go on out and find perhaps less expensive, less costly sources for those same things. And that was a primary motive for the American Revolution. That's why it's called Independence Day. Not Freedom Day, not We Kicked the British Butt Day. Coming up a little more than a month on Independence Day, and it's time to remember what that really means. Being free from enforced dependence on politically favored corporations, banks, and businesses. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And at this point, there's an ugly reality we all need to look at. Assuming the United States economy and government does not collapse, we as a nation will be leaving a debt of $30 trillion to our grandchildren. Now, these grandchildren, who will be U.S. citizens by birth, will have never had a chance to vote on whether they will accept that debt. They're being made debt slaves before they're even conceived. Our generation is doing exactly the same thing. We've all been made debt slaves by that Federal Reserve. We never had a chance to vote on that. We never had a chance on whether we wanted to surrender the constitutional monetary system this nation was founded on in favor of privatization of the economy for profit. Why are we obligated to go along with something that we ourselves have never had a chance to vote on? That's an important question in a supposed democratic society. Now, as you know, last week we had Ellen Brown on the show, and one of the revelations she shared with us is that when you go to the store and you buy a product, a bottle of water, 40% of the price of that product on the shelf is the accumulated interest paid to the bank along the entire production, delivery, supply chain, distribution path. 40%. Another statistic I heard is that the accumulated hidden taxes on the production of the product amount to another 30%. And that's before the sales taxes apply. And then we wonder why the products that we spend so much money on turn out to be so cheaply made or poor quality, filled with fillers and chemical additives. Too much of the economic activity of the people is being siphoned off by taxes and banker interest. And that's why other countries don't want to buy our products, because they are overpriced and poor quality. Now, Donald Trump, considering that he's a businessman, he went on out and he did something that I'm having a real problem with. Apparently, Trump is slamming Germany for selling millions of cars in the United States and saying, we will stop this. Well, yes, he's being protectionist. But here's what's going on. Germany makes very good cars. So does Japan. I love Hondas. People want to buy very good cars. That's how commerce is supposed to work. If Trump wants Germany or Japan to sell fewer cars in the United States of America, then America's automotive industry has to be overhauled and revamped and made competitive. And instead, Trump has hit the easy button of protectionism. Protectionism is a red warning flag of an economy in decline. Now, Russia and Iran have signed off on an oil for goods barter deal. Iran is going to send Russia oil. Russia is going to send Iran whatever Iran wants for it as a direct swap, trade. They're not going through the electronic banking system. They're not going through the petrodollar. There are no sanctions on barter and trade. And it's another sign of a world that is rejecting U.S. hegemonic domination of the global economy. Now, over in Italy, as you know, they're in serious, serious economic trouble. Their banks are in a real mess. And despite that, Italy is now refusing any bail-ins from outside, probably because they've seen what that did to Greece. They're saying, we're going to fix this ourselves internally, stay the heck out. Because everything that is done from outside, from the IMF, from the ECB, it's just another loan. It just plunges the nation further and more hopelessly into debt, just as we have seen in Greece and Cyprus. And Italy says no. Now, we had a caller on the line earlier who was talking about Bitcoin and how, oh, I wish I'd bought Bitcoin when it was whatever it was back then. And it was soaring up high. And last week I was saying it feels like it's being bubbled up, it's being manipulated. And any virtual currency or imaginary currency that is not tied to a commodity base can be manipulated in this way. And apparently there was a major drop in Bitcoin. And according to Natural News, they're saying that Bitcoin has moved into the pump and dump phase. And the Bitcoin propagandists are out there saying that, Bitcoin is still fine. Keep on buying. Keep on buying. They've turned it into a Ponzi scheme. Those who got out early made money. Those who did not, those who are being convinced to stay in Bitcoin, you're going to take a bath. Now, over in Great Britain, the furor over Brexit is continuing, with Brussels imposing ever more stringent demands on the soft Brexit, including continuance of the open borders, acceptance of refugees, Brussels' control over parts of Britain's economy, making the soft Brexit a Brexit in name only. Along with, of course, this ever-skyrocketing demand for money from Great Britain as a divorce payment, none of which is actually in Article 50 of the European Union Agreement. And so Theresa May is now saying it's time to talk hard Brexit. Put up the fences on the Channel Tunnel, just cut the computer lines, just cut it off right now. No talks, no discussion, hard Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn is still out there pushing that there has to be a deal with the EU to leave. So this is leading to a big faction fight. I think probably the majority of the British people are ready for a hard Brexit because they're seeing all this delay tactic, negotiation, demand for money, demand for concessions, as just Brussels trying to reassert their control over sovereign Great Britain, and I think the British people have really fed up. Italy has signed an agreement with Libya, Chad, and Niger to limit the influx of migrants. See, all these human smugglers that are working across the Mediterranean, technically under international law, when you find a refugee floating in the ocean, you're supposed to take them to the nearest port. They don't. They drop them off in Italy. And Italy is really feeling the pressure from the influx of migrants, and now they're signing agreements saying, no, we're not going to take any more. And this is in defiance of the European Union, which is saying, yes, you will take all the refugees we want. Now, Poland and Brussels are in a standoff over this very issue. And Poland is saying that they're going to take this matter to court because they can't take in any more migrants. It is a strain on their already strained social system. It has led to massive increases in crime, especially violent crime, seeing it all over Europe, Germany, especially in Sweden. And even Germany is starting to talk more nationalistic. Amazingly enough, for all of her allegiance to the New World Order and globalism, Angela Merkel is saying Europe can no longer rely on the U.S. or U.K. and must fight for its own destiny. So now they're out there talking about a new isolated Europe. Meanwhile, a leading economist in Brussels is saying that Jean-Claude Juncker and Angela Merkel's vision of an expanding European project is doomed, precisely because it has that built-in self-destruct device called the European Central Bank. which, like the Federal Reserve, by design creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt starts taking the whole system down. And that's what we're seeing happen right now. A right-wing National Front Party member, in an interview in Sputnik, is saying that the German economy is thriving at the expense of the other EU states. I'm not sure that that's entirely accurate. Up until the Brexit, Germany and Great Britain bore the burden of the economic hardship of the EU as a whole. But it can be understood if the people of Germany, whose labor and technology produce a good gross domestic product, might want to keep more of that at home to benefit themselves. The same motivation that led to the Brexit. You know, we've built our little country. It's doing very well. We have manufacturing. We have agriculture. You know, we want to do better for our next generation. We built this nation and its wealth and its heritage and its culture as our legacy to the next generation. No, you may not take that away from us. So we're seeing splits and fractures all over the European Union right now. Apparently, the G7 leaders, during their meeting, out of concerns for security, have asked for the migrant boats to be stopped. Can you see the hypocrisy in that? The G7 leaders, oh, we don't want the migrants around us. Could be a problem, could be a problem. But for you ordinary people, just welcome them in, give them a big, wet, sloppy kiss, and when you come down with a rare disease, it's good for the medical industrial complex here. Out in Los Angeles, the federal government is starting to enforce the immigration laws. They nabbed 200 illegal immigrants, and we are seeing a decline in the number of illegal refugees coming across the border. So that part of Trump's border agenda is starting to work. But he's facing opposition from within his own government. This is a story that came out of the Conservative Tribune. And they, in turn, are quoting the New York Times, saying that the State Department, on their own authority, has lifted the restrictions on the number of refugees allowed to enter in the United States that flies in the face of Trump's campaign promises to voters. Apparently, in an email sent just days ago, a State Department official named Jennifer L. Smith quietly told private agencies involved in refugee assistance that foreigners can now enter the country unconstrained by the weekly quotas now in place. In other words, this Jennifer Smith is saying, ignore the quota system, just pull them on in as fast as you can. Now, this story actually made the corporate media. And apparently down in Austin, Texas, the legislature was meeting, talking about immigration, and apparently there was this big tiff getting into between two of the representatives, Rinaldi and Navarez. And apparently there was a huge protest out front with people holding signs proclaiming, I'm an illegal immigrant, I have a right to stay here. So Rinaldi basically called the Immigration Customs Enforcement. There's a bunch of illegal immigrants all in one lump out in front. Go get them. And apparently when Navarez found out about it, he literally lost his cool. On the floor of the legislature, tried to beat Rinaldi up and then threatened his life. Literally said that he was going to find him in the parking lot and kill him, which is going to be a trick. Rinaldi has a concealed handgun license. But I mean, this shows you how badly this open borders issue is being driven to where it's leading to legislators threatening each other on the floor. We could see a civil war in this country from all of these fanatics pushing their agenda and thinking that they're right and everybody else has to be wrong. Now, over in the universities, as you know, the liberal agenda, the snowflakes, are out there trying to sell this idea that those who are doing poorly in their grades are somehow being cheated by the white privilege or whatever. And apparently, according to this story over an Investment Watch blog, apparently liberal students who are getting high grades are now asking the school administrators to sort of redistribute the wealth of high grades to the lower GPA students. I'm sorry, grades are not a commodity. It is a measurement of academic achievement. And if you do this, it completely undermines the whole idea of having grades in a GPA. And if you do that, on what basis will potential employers decide who and who not to hire? The whole advantage of having those high grades in your college education, assuming you have an actual degree that's useful someplace, is to get to the head of the job line and say, I want that job. I had good grades. I can do the job. And then the employer says, I have no idea if you got the grades because you earned them or because somebody transferred them over to you for some liberal cause. We're seeing virtually every institution in this country undermined in terms of what we're supposed to think about them. Good grades don't mean today what good grades used to mean before. It really is getting kind of silly out there. Alrighty, let's see. Let's talk about the drug war. And we know that the war on drugs in this country is really the war on the competition's drugs. But there was a story that came out, Patriot Rising, about a drug cop who spent 14 years undercover going public and saying that it isn't working. The drug war and the illegal drug traffic are just increasing crime and violence. And he says everything the police are trying to do only exacerbate the drug-related crime. It's time for a new approach. Now, in countries that have decriminalized drugs, those crime problems go away. There's no more profit motive. But drugs are kept illegal in this country to keep them profitable. It's a replay of what happened during Prohibition, where the rum runners worked to keep alcohol illegal as long as possible to maximize the money they made from their illegal trade. And we're seeing it all over again in this country. Now, more and more, we're seeing a lot of states are pushing back against marijuana prohibition, both for its revenue-generating capability, the fact that it's actually less harmful than tobacco or alcohol, and it does have legitimate medicinal uses. But the entrenched corporate establishment, big alcohol, big tobacco, big pharma, they all want it to go away to protect their bottom line. We're going to take another break for commercials. Back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, as you know, one of the big problems that we're dealing with in terms of the damage caused by a lot of modern pharmaceuticals is that in many cases, the pharmaceutical industries are protected by law. Certainly that's true in the case of the vaccines. You have to go through the Vaccine Injury Court. But it turns out there's now another weapon that's surfacing, and it's called a shareholder lawsuit. And apparently more and more of the shareholders of these pharmaceutical companies, when they make a major mess up about one of their medications that leads to losses, they're starting to file lawsuits themselves. And there is no law that shields a corporation from lawsuits by their own stockholders. Now, following the wake of new state restrictions, Planned Parenthood is going to close 4 of their clinics in Iowa. And basically, Planned Parenthood is back in the news. Apparently, there have been a couple more embarrassing videos that surfaced about it. And so over in Iowa, Governor Terry Branstad signed a Health and Human Services budget that discontinued the state's federal Medicaid family planning waiver and replaced it with a state program that excludes any clinic that offers abortions. Now, of course, the pro-abortionists are going to be up in arms and screaming, our body, our right, so forth and so on. And again, it's a complex issue. I concede there are times and circumstances when abortion is necessary and justified. I certainly do not agree with it being used as retroactive birth control by adults who are just being careless in their sexual behavior. It's what Planned Parenthood was doing with the parts that I think has most people appalled. We're going to take a phone call now. Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Aloha?
Aloha.
Yes. I was calling about, you had said they were going to start rehashing 9/11, and I hope that they will bring up the idea that they sent back to Israel the dancing Jews that were supposedly filming the whole thing before it ever took place.
Okay, Andrea. They're bringing up 9/11 again. At least the corporate media and the government, they're bringing up 9/11 again to try and now sell the idea that Iran was behind it. And obviously, in the independent media, we'll bring all of that other stuff about 9/11 up again. But again, like trying to blame Saudi Arabia for 9/11, it doesn't make sense Iran would do something like that.
Yeah, and what about the truck that was full of bombs that was going to the tunnel that was caught?
Yeah.
And what about Larry Silverstein, the only person that would buy the World Trade Center that was full of the asbestos? Nobody else would buy the place because they were going to be out millions and millions of dollars. And then he made a killing on the insurance. And it just goes on. And then when you say that our children are going to be responsible or for paying all this debt back, that they can just print money out of thin air, and we need to make our children very aware of what they're doing with just printing money out of thin air. Oh, you still there?
We do. Andrea, got to let you go. Got to take a station identification break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. And we're going to take a phone call from Frank in North Carolina. Frank, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I kind of take issue with something that it's kind of a recurring theme with you, where it's all about, and I understand partly where you're coming from. I understand the Vietnam veterans coming home got spat on and everything, and, I don't agree with that. I'm a Marine Corps veteran myself, but at some point with the advent, not just the existence, but the advent of the Internet and alternative information, it's everywhere. Everybody knows somebody who said, hey, have you ever taken a look at 9/11? It's up to them whether they do or not, but at some point we have to hold these people accountable, especially these career military people and officers, college-educated military officers. At some point, if nobody came to a war, nobody would go fight the war. We couldn't have a war, right? Well, I guess you got Blackwater and you got these, but I still don't think it would go on to the extent. At some point, I don't respect veterans, to be quite honest with you. I have compassion for, these 18, 19-year-old kids that don't know anything. They're ignorant. They come from an ignorant background or something. But, people that went to good schools and everything, and I see these interviews with people, even women, they're like, well, I have to fight. I want to go kill people, and they become pilots dropping bombs on people that have never done anything to them. I think at some point, and I think we're way past that point, in my opinion, we have to hold these people accountable.
I actually do agree with you. When I talk about respecting our veterans, I'm usually talking about the ground pounders, the people who are conscripts or they joined the military because they didn't have any other option. You're right. Once you get into the officer corps, you're dealing with people who know what the real agendas are and the real purposes are and the war crimes, and we do have to have a demarcation point. When I talk about having a debt of obligation to all those wounded veterans coming on back, is recognition of the fact that they were lied to about the real purposes of the war as much as the rest of we were. But for those military officers who knew it was a lie, obviously they deserve nothing but our scorn and disrespect.
And we know it's a lie now. That's what the government does. These people are criminals. The people they work. Our military, it's like it goes back to War as a Racket by General Smedley Butler, 2-time recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Absolutely.
Big shot, Marine Corps. He said all war, it's all a racket. And we have to hold these people accountable at some point, the ones who know or should know, who have had every available opportunity to find out, but they chose to look the other way. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, you're welcome, and congratulations on getting through your service as a Marine and coming back to us. But as a Marine, you probably remember during basic training, there's a lot of brainwashing that's going on as well, along with the physical training. They're trying to create fanatic true believers, and I've had a few discussions with people like that here on the island of Oahu. And there's also the reality that when you're living on military bases, there's a lot of filtering of the internet that's already going on. They're very, very careful about what's allowed to get in there and what isn't. And so unless these people who are living on base housing, they go on out someplace else and get onto a computer, and that's going to be an uncommon occurrence. Yeah, they're shielded from things that might get in the way of the war agenda. Anyway, Frank, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch to Brandon in San Francisco. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I called in about silver as an alternative currency, but may I make a comment on the military and the application of the force?
Okay.
I used to think long and hard about how we allowed Guantanamo and abuse of detainees and such and war crimes. And I've come to the idea that maybe they do it intentionally. They make these soldiers do these atrocious acts so that it destroys their soul. And once they return to society, they are not fully functioning individuals once they've served their usefulness. Also, like pumping them full of experimental drugs. I just wanted to throw that out there, but I did call about silver.
Before we go to silver, I want to respond to what you said. There is absolutely no question that a lot of soldiers who serve in these various campaigns do come back traumatized by what they've been forced to do, and they have difficulty reassimilating into our society. A lot of PTSD out there. Now, as far as the actual commission of the torture, first of all, we the people did not allow it to happen. We the people didn't even know what was going on until there were some whistleblowers who came on out and said, look what's going on. But in the case of torture centers like Abu Ghraib, the people actually doing the torture are not your rank-and-file soldiers and airmen and so forth. They are hired contractors working for the CIA. And so these are people who are just, this is what they do, and they're used to it, and apparently they're able to live comfortably with it. We're going to do a quick shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Pardon me. As far as intentionally wanting to send back dysfunctional veterans to our society, I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just something they don't really care about. Once these young people have done what they were told to do, they're simply discarded as no longer being useful to the war agenda. I remember back during the Second Iraq War where Donald Rumsfeld was out there just wringing his hands that too many of these U.S. soldiers in Iraq were surviving their injuries, and it was just this incredible burden on the war budget. The spreadsheet hadn't allowed for this many people to actually survive their battlefield injuries. And that is exactly how they think about the people in uniform. They're just assets. They're just livestock. They're soldiers. They go on out there, and they're predicting a certain number will be killed, a certain number will be wounded. And as we've seen from VA scandal after VA scandal after VA scandal, once these kids come on back, they're all but abandoned to whatever their fate is going to be, because the focus of the government is to grab the new young kids and put them into uniform and get them over to the battlefield as soon as they can.
Yeah, and they're considered, the government considers them the number one threat to their monopolies or whatnot. So on silver, I was thinking Max Kaiser. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Max Kaiser was saying if you wanted to kill the Chase Bank, metaphorically, you'd buy silver and destroy Jamie Dimon. And going with that thread, if we just started doing our own commerce in silver amongst ourselves, do you think at some point maybe it could catch on and we could just get out from underneath the central bank and start using old silver coins and silver objects that have value?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the advantages of what's called the junk silver coins, the pre-64 coins that actually had metal in them, everybody recognizes their value. It's a known unit of worth, and yeah, people could carry on commerce doing that on a cash-only basis. Unfortunately, if it ever really started to take off, I can guarantee you that the U.S. government would immediately pass laws outlawing it. We're already seeing in some states like Arizona where they have removed the capital gains tax from the buying and selling of gold and silver coins, turning them into an alternative currency. But a lot of people are going to be looking at alternative currencies because the currency coming out of the Federal Reserve, it's a debt trap. People realize it's a debt trap. And around the world, they're saying it's just not considered reliable or dependable any longer. And as things start to really come apart in this country, you'll see local communities have their own indigenous currencies. It happened during the Depression of the 1930s. It happened during the Civil War, and it will happen again.
Right. Like you hear the term the deep state now, it's a zeitgeist, and it's on the tip of people's tongues. Maybe at some point, alternative currency and the Fed will be the zeitgeist and on the tip of the tongue. I think if enough people get involved, there's no way the government would try to squash it.
Oh, yes, they will.
Momentum.
Yes, they will. Remember how Roosevelt banned gold coin and bar ownership?
Right, but I understand a lot of people didn't participate. They actually kept their gold, and so be it. I think only one person was prosecuted under that. I don't know. I probably heard that from you. But anyway, that was just my thought, using silver coins to kind of stick it to the Fed. And Max Kaiser definitely was a proponent of that. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the face of a Federal Reserve note, it says this note is legal tender for all debts public and private. It doesn't say it's the only one. If you and somebody else want to do business with each other, whatever currency you want to use, that's the currency you're using. It's that simple. And anything with inherent value to it, silver coins, gold coins, copper. There have been some cultures where specific seashells were the unit of currency because it was based on a commodity, the seashell. And it was in limited supply, so they couldn't play around with that. All righty. Now then, up in Sweden, they like to portray themselves as this incredible liberal paradise. There are bicycle paths everywhere and carless zones. And when Grand Tour was up there, Jeremy Clarkson couldn't resist poking fun at their feminist government. So it is very, very surprising, with Sweden being as far down the liberal agenda as they are, that all of a sudden they have now banned mandatory vaccinations, citing serious health concerns. And apparently Sweden's constitution is interpreted as granting a right to the citizen to choose their own health care. Probably the only reason our Bill of Rights didn't have that in there is back then it was taken for granted. You got to choose what your health care was going to be. It wasn't even considered possible that there would be an abusive government saying you will take this medicine, you will not take that medicine. But Sweden has now banned mandatory vaccinations. If you want to get them, you can get them. You do not have to. So far this year, the U.S. government has already paid out $159 million in damages to vaccine-injured children, and still the corporate media is out there saying vaccines are perfectly safe. Get all those 38, 39, however many that there are required now. Apparently they were showing Vaxxed in a theater down in New Zealand, and this doctor got up literally in front of the screen, waving his arms, saying, "Every one of you watching this, you're killing babies. You've got to stop doing this here." Apparently over in Great Britain, there is another contaminated blood scandal, and of course what makes it a scandal is not the contaminated blood, but the cover-up. And apparently the British government had uncovered evidence that AIDS was in blood products all the way back to 1984, which, by the way, times out to a similar tainted blood scandal that was going on in Arkansas under then Governor Bill Clinton. But apparently the notifications did not go out rapidly, and as a result, a lot of people in Great Britain who use those blood products now have AIDS, and some are starting to die. Now, getting on back to marijuana, the American Legion Let's see. Okay. The American Legion is calling on Donald Trump to take marijuana off schedule to help veterans because apparently it does help in treating post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think maybe it is time for them to consider that as at least one little kindness they can do to these suffering veterans. And this stands in contrast with this very tragic story where apparently a Marine veteran is facing potentially life in prison over 1 ounce of marijuana he was using to treat his post-traumatic stress disorder. And it is a classic story. A gentleman named Landowski. The prescription medications being given to him by the VA for his PTSD were not working. They made him feel terrible. We know how dangerous those prescription psychiatric medications can be. And so he started growing a little bit of marijuana for his own personal use. And unfortunately, even with the marijuana, he had a PTSD episode. His wife called the police to come help calm him down, and instead they arrested him. Another story, this one out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. There's a new study showing that marijuana can actually make it easier for cocaine addicts to quit. That's another positive use for marijuana. Rather than be the rumored gateway drug, it could actually be the escape hatch drug. Now, last week you probably heard of this story where British Airways had to cancel a whole bunch of flights because of a massive computer system failure. 300,000 passengers. Because their computer system, their global computer system broke down. Turns out the story gets even better than that. Because apparently British Airways had outsourced their IT management to a company in India, and the technicians in India didn't know how to boot the backup system that would have got everything up and running in the space of a couple of minutes. Oopsie. Little bit of an oopsie. Now, as you know, there's a big debate over the banning of laptops to certain on flights from certain Muslim countries, and everybody's screaming racism, so forth and so on. Well, they're going to end that one now because apparently the United States is talking about extending the laptop ban to all international flights. And this is a bad idea. First of all, I'm convinced that you can make any kind of a significant bomb inside a laptop. Second, it exposes those laptops to theft by the baggage crews, which is a reality of life. It's like another classic case. We're going to do a booga-booga, tell you something scary, pass a bunch of laws, make you think we're taking care of you, and it just winds up being a huge headache for everybody. As you know, sharing of data has become a major issue with privacy advocates. And there's an article that came out over an activist post. Apparently, over at the University of California, they've done a study showing that 7 out of every 10 smartphone applications will share your data with third-party services, mostly advertisers. But there is no opt-out. We're going to take a phone call now. Rick in Arizona, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I listened to a podcast a while ago, and the guest was a guy named Barry Lanza, who circulated high in the oil industry over the years. And he said that the national health care system in England is paid for by Royal Dutch Shell's profits from their Iran operations. Now, he said that, for example, the other oil companies are WASP oil companies like the British Petroleum, and a couple other names. He said that the deal was for Royal Dutch Shell, which was a Rothschild company, to get into Iran, they had to pay, the profits had to pay for the national health care system. And, I can't prove that, but that's what he said. And I was wondering if you ever heard anything like that.
No, I hadn't. I'll certainly take a look into it. But it would really make sense that if you're going to try and have a national health care system, finding a way to fund it from a major source of revenue would be a good way to do it. Here in the United States of America, of course, we're paying all these high taxes, high fees, high interest to the banks, and we're still expected to pay for our own health care and education. And that's why we're struggling so hard.
Wouldn't all the people that profit from the banks and the oil companies fit into a small auditorium?
Yeah, they would. Have you ever seen the little animation, the tiny dot?
No.
All right, I'm going to put it up on my webpage over this next commercial break. But yeah, the wealth inequality has reached a point where the ultra-rich billionaires, it's a very, very small group of people sitting on top of a global population in the billions of people who are just barely surviving. And that really is not a sustainable model for any kind of government. Sooner or later, there's going to be violent uprisings. Eat the rich will no longer just be a joke on a T-shirt.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And when we come on back here from this next commercial break, more about computers. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as I was saying at the very top of the program, the reason we did not have a live broadcast yesterday as planned was because the Spectrum cable TV internet went down 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, came back briefly just before showtime yesterday, then went down yet again. And it underscores the fact that our infrastructure in all levels is continuing to deteriorate. And we're right now getting literally just 10% of the bandwidth that we actually pay for. And we're almost afraid to, like, say, we want the less expensive plan out of fear that we'll get even less. But there's an article over here came out of The Verge basically saying that major internet ISPs are being accused of deliberately throttling traffic. And over at Spectrum, somebody actually found one of the internal documents saying that in order to manage network load, that they engage in speed enforcement. And then they say, well, we're not throttling. We don't call it that. We call it something else. We're calling it speed enforcement, therefore it's not throttling, and it's your classic weasel wording. But apparently the issue is that these companies are not making investments to keep their networks up to par, to carry the capacity that they're selling. They're selling more and more internet services, but they're not increasing the net to carry the additional load, and that's why we're getting into this throttling. If you go over to downdetector.com and look at Spectrum, nonstop complaints all over the country. And apparently Level 3, which is one of the top tiers of internet connectivity, is making the accusations that these major internet service providers are abusing their market share to interfere with the flow of internet for end users. And apparently, according to Level 3, these ISPs are basically attempting to get Level 3 to pay them a fee for additional traffic caused by services like Netflix. So they're already out there inadequate and still trying to find a way to maximize the profit from it. And what's really amazing, it was only about 10 years ago everybody was complaining about how much dark fiber was out there. Because when all the internet was really starting to boom up, everybody was laying cables and there wasn't enough traffic for the cables. Now they're saturated. And nobody's got the money to actually go on out there and find ways to improve the bandwidth and actually deliver the service people are paying for in this country. Over in places like Japan, it's gigabit into the home at the consumer level. And they don't seem to have any problem sustaining that. Now, apparently, getting on back to liberal Sweden, they have now placed kill switches on their corporate media channels to block any kind of reading, saving, or translating pages about the Muslim refugees. If you try and go on any social media, corporate media, talking about the refugees, boom, you're cut off. All right, let's take a phone call. Ramsey in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. I have a question. See, sir, why is the opposition is so much against Trump? Like I just don't understand. Like Caesar, Donald Trump attacked Syria, he attacked Afghanistan, he made the deal with Saudi Arabia, which of course is going to benefit ISIS and so on. So why are these people still against Trump? Like everything Trump did, like these people should be happy with Trump.
Well, you need to understand there are different agendas at work here. And yes, Trump has caved into the war agenda, but behind that you still have the Bush-Clinton cartel want to regain a lock on the White House. Their plan ever since the 1980s was to hand that White House off back and forth, Clinton, Bush, Bush, Clinton, in order to keep the lid on all that CIA drug running and corruption. And the Clintons and the Bushes do not trust Trump not to look where the evidence starts to lead as these cases unravel. That's why they're having a panic over the Seth Rich case. So you're dealing with different factions and different agendas. It's not Trump and the opposition. It's Trump and the War Party, Trump and the CIA, Trump and the Clintons. There are a lot of different players. Thank you for the phone call, Ramsey. Got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about Internet service, and I'm already getting a bunch of emails from people who are also on Spectrum just saying, yeah, it was out where they were yesterday or over the weekend, and the service is really, really terrible. And life under fascism, what can I tell you? Internet is not the only one. The cable TV industry is in serious, serious trouble. They're losing subscribers. Now, the only reason we still subscribe to cable TV is it's bundled with our Internet service. But more and more people are switching over to streaming services where they decide where they when and where they want to watch what they want to watch, which is very, very convenient. And certainly looking at the cable offerings we get here, Claire and I, we go around that dial. We've got all these channels, and they're always showing the same thing over and over and over and over again. There's hardly anything new out there. It's a rarity to see something new. So that's another reason. People want to look at what's new. They don't want to see endless reruns, pay for endless reruns. All right, let's take a few more phone calls here. Alex in San Antonio, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was calling because I wanted to ask you a question regarding the laptops on the computer, on the airplanes coming to the U.S. I was wondering, could it possibly be that you could have somebody hack into the avionics? And
no. The in-cabin entertainment network is isolated from the cockpit controls. There's no connection. A lot of people have wondered about that, but for the very obvious reason, the cabin entertainment network is isolated.
But you wouldn't have to do it through the. I mean, you could do it. There's several different ways to be able to interact with the computer on board. It's just
how would you do it? It doesn't have Wi-Fi. It doesn't have Bluetooth. It's not connected.
Well, there is Wi-Fi on there's Wi-Fi on some flights, especially international.
Yeah, in the cabin. In the cabin, but the flight control system in the cockpit doesn't use Wi-Fi. Again, for the very obvious reason.
I'm just saying, could it be possible that I mean, because there are always caveats and things we don't know,
well,
which is why I'm wondering.
No, I don't think so.
Go ahead.
I don't think so. In fact, even this idea of having to turn off your electronic devices during takeoff and landing appears to be overblown. Mythbusters actually did one of their episodes on this where they had an aircraft with a modern cockpit, and they were back there in the cabin with all kinds of cell phones and laptops and everything, and they were turning them on and turning them off. They could not get any indications of any interference with the cockpit flight system.
Fair enough. That's understandable. It's just that you always tell us that there's always things that we don't know, and there's always, for security reasons, there's always end arounds and whatnot. And
well, in our products, in the consumer products and everything, but airline cockpits are something else, completely different. They're totally air gapped. Most of those boxes basically amount to Faraday shields as well. So they're shielded.
Well, no, you would hope so. You would hope so,
okay.
But I mean, there are there are ways that, you know, because especially how you always mention it sometimes.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Anyway, Alex,
No,
thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Charles in Texas. Charles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, this is Charles from Texas, and I'm the one that sent you the email a little while ago about, he's a buddy of mine, he's a full-blown Democrat. He's always putting your name out there, you know?
Okay.
And it's, you know, and it's just funny that he keeps putting your name out there, you know, with Alex Jones, and, you know, and then with the funny thing when I told, you know, when I emailed you earlier, but the funny thing was about the whole thing about the chemtrails deals, and I know where you stand on chemtrails, and I did my research on that too, and it all goes back to what you say. It's just the what was it, how the plane flies through the air and how it leaves the trail.
Well, I got to tell you, I enjoyed the graphic. I especially enjoyed your observation that the baby didn't have a face mask, and I loved the caption: "Forget about war, poverty, and corruption. We're fighting clouds." And I thought that was great. But, you know, there are a lot of people out there who are trying to find any way to denigrate anybody in the independent media, whether it's Alex Jones or myself, you know, or John Stadmiller. And the best thing to do is just ignore them. It's just a waste of time to try and get to get sucked into that debate.
Yeah, and then I told him, I said, if you have such an issue with him, I said, won't you just challenge him yourself? I said, he's on the radio. He's on from 3 to 4. 3 to 5 over here, you know, local time. And I told him, I said, go ahead. I said, I dare you challenge him. I said, if you can find me where he says chemtrails, because I will vote Democrat the next, you know, election. and I'm still waiting on him to run his response.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know.
Well,
and then I wanted to come back. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, I mean, you can tell how scared everybody is about the Seth Rich case because, once again, my mailbox is being flooded with no plane at the Pentagon and the UFOs, hollow Earth, fake Apollo moon landings, and just they're just dumping all of that junk as hard as they can all over the independent media, trying to make us look bad, trying to somehow find a way to wreck our credibility in the false hope that the American people will immediately flock back to the corporate media to get their daily dose of reality.
And that's one thing I wanted to point out. I mean, I got, you know, plenty of friends, you know, that, you know, some of us are awake, you know, in the sense of what's going on, but some people follow the rabbit hole too deep into those sections of the independent media. Where, you know, I try to tell them, stick to the status quo. What is the main thing? It goes, if you look at all those videos that you're looking at, what's the main thing that's always there? The banks.
Yep.
You know, the Federal Reserve. I said, that's the main thing. And then they go from there, and then they go on to the whole, you know, UFO, the reptilians, and all that other stuff. I said, no. I said, that's just something to keep your mind occupied away from what really is going on. I said, look at what's going on. I told them, read the Constitution. That tells you a lot. I said, then go and look at the banks. I said that the money junkies. I use that word a lot. The money junkies, which you know what I grabbed from you a little bit. And I tell them, I said, look at the money junkies. Look at that. Look how our state is. You know, I'm talking about, look how many jobs are not there. Look at all this other stuff that's going on around us, and you don't. He goes, you tend to look away from that. That's the status quo that we need to be looking at.
Well, yeah, that's basically, you know, people can find a great deal of fun and enjoyment in trying to figure out things, and they can get lured off into rather ridiculous areas, and some of that is intentional as part of the campaign to discredit the independent media. But you need to always remember Occam's razor from William of Ockham. The simplest explanation is generally going to be the correct one. And, you know, just stay focused on the things that you really know, and don't get lured off with all this talk about, you know, unreachably far conspiracies like the Bilderbergers or the rest of it. As you say yourself, the cause of our misery is right on the Main Street, USA, and that's those Federal Reserve banks. By the way, originally I called them money addicts. I got the phrase money junkies from Buffy St. Marie, who came out here to do a charity concert for one of our local public radio stations, KKCR, where I used to do a lot of interviews with Michael Vanderveer, who is sadly no longer with us. But she came on out, and she was using the term money junkies, and I said, that's it, that captures it. Money addicts is a behavior. Money junkies captures the personality, and that's where I got that from. I'm not going to claim originating it.
Oh, okay.
That's where I got it, and I'm going to go on using it.
Yes. And I wanted to come back to what y'all were talking about earlier about the internet and and how slow the stuff is, how slow down it is becoming, in my area too. I mean, it's like that, even when I listen to, to RBN, it's like, it's always, lagging. It's always lagging. And I have, I'm supposed to, for the amount of money that I pay for, for like you said, the bundle that I get, because it includes the internet. I mean, it's slow. And I'm supposed to be paying, I think like 100-something BPs per minute or whatever. I don't really know
bits per
too
second.
much about it.
They sell them at bits per second. 300 megabits per second is currently the top available to consumers, and that's basically it. And it's a good stream for most applications. But when you do an internet speed test to the mainland, and you're only getting 30 megabits per second on a 300 megabits per second line, you know you're being cheated. And whether that is intentionally trying to slow the net down, for those of us on the independent media, that may be one explanation. I tend to think it is these companies, as they spend huge amounts of money gobbling up competitors and building these monopolies, they are not investing the money in the actual increasing of their systems to carry the additional traffic that they're acquiring, and that really is a major problem.
Yeah, and I know I've complained about it to them, and they told me, oh, we can sell you this device, that'll help you speed it up, and get better, reach, blah blah blah. I'm like, well, then why would I want to do that if I'm already paying top dollar for what I'm supposed to be getting?
Yeah, that's a discussion I had with the Spectrum people when I said I'm only getting 30 megabits per second. And they said, well, you need one of our new packages. And I said, I already have the package. Check on your computer. I'm supposed to be getting 300 megabits per second. At which point I got the lecture, oh, reboot your router, reboot your cable modem. We can send out a technician in 3 years to check out the lines and blah, 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 blah. And, that's the way they're basically the agenda of the customer support is make the customer think it's their fault and they will go away, which doesn't work for those of us who actually know anything about Internet communication. Anyway, we're going to let you go here. We're running out of time here.
All right, have a good one.
Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mark?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been covering the Seth Rich case. I'm going on YouTube and a lot. I noticed something. Not only is the mainstream media or a fake stream media not covering it, but certain parts of what call themselves alternate media. And one of them is Breitbart. The thing is, you got a guy by the name of, you probably know who I'm talking about, Lee Stranahan.
Yeah.
And he is going methodically into this. Breitbart fired him. They fired him because, that was before he started even covering Seth Rich because of the CrowdStrike. He wanted to cover CrowdStrike, which they refused. Breitbart now, without Steve Bannon, becoming a very fake news themselves.
Yes.
Yes. They've got these two guys, Alex Marlowe and Matt Boyle, basically run it. And they're running people like Stranahan, who's probably one of the best reporters in this country. Even, what's his name, Bannon said that. And they're running it into the ground, and yet they keep on calling themselves alternate media. I don't even listen to them very much anymore. Once in a while, I'm up at that time, if I'm on the road, there's nothing else. Yeah, and I'm serious. I'll listen to them. But I'm listening to them now just to see whether they cover this Seth Rich case. It's almost like it doesn't exist.
Well, there's something you need to keep in mind with the independent media. If they seem to have a lot of corporate funding to be able to afford being up on Sirius and the rest of it, you have to know that some strings have been attached to that money. And what we're seeing here is an effort by the corporate media to buy up as much of the independent media as they can. And, of course, that's being kept very, very hidden. but we have seen more than a few times where an independent media outlet that is really doing a good job, all of a sudden they got a lot of funding and they're expanding and they get studios and everybody's making good money, and then all of a sudden there are lines they will not cross any longer. And so,
well, you know, yeah, they're not even having Roger Stone on there anymore. Now, when Bannon was running it, and before the election, Stone was almost as frequent a guest on Breitbart as he was on InfoWars, and now it's as if they never heard of him. And on top of that, somebody else called the other day about Syria, and that was a false flag. And this guy Marlowe says we don't cover conspiracy theories. So this is deteriorating very quickly, and I think people ought to know that. And either comment, maybe I've commented a few times on their Facebook, or stop listening to them altogether. And I think they're going to either get the message, or they're going to go the way of a lot of other shows that went down the drain. Glenn Beck, for instance, is pretty much going down the drain now. That's basically it with them, because they keep on calling themselves alternate media, and they're anything but alternate media as far as I'm concerned anymore. But they were when Bannon was on. Yes. They were still serious then. I think they started out like a house on fire. Yeah. They were getting the ratings and everything else. He was taking one call after another. He didn't care. You could say pretty much anything. He didn't call you a conspiracy theorist or anything else. So, you know, this is just, I don't think necessarily the corporate, that they're listening to the corporations as much as
they've been infiltrated. Bannon did not leave Breitbart in the hands of people who valued freedom of speech. Basically, Breitbart is another gatekeeper, and it unfortunately does happen. And all the rest of us can do is try and remain as independent as we possibly can while we still can. Anyway, listen, Mark, I need to let you go.
One other thing. I just want to make a suggestion to everybody. Okay. Follow this guy Stranahan. He's excellent. He's also got a show on Sputnik News now with some guy named Nick, and he is excellent. Okay, just to let people know that. Okay?
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. We're going to switch over to Mike in Arizona. Thank you for waiting very, very patiently. I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What is on your mind? Mike in Arizona.
Hey,
there you are.
Yes. Last week, the Department of Justice, in a press release, I'm pretty sure it was last Tuesday, Banamex, it's a corporate offshoot from Citibank. They were fined $97.44 million for money laundering and drugs, money coming from the United States back to Mexico, talking about money junkies. So I guess over the years they had handled like $8.8 billion, and they claimed that they only had 2 people watching these money transfers, and they didn't barely watch anybody at all. So another deal that we're not seeing in the news. Back to BCCI again.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I think people are beginning to realize that banks are not the pinnacle of honesty and ethics and morality, but are in fact the dark heart at the heart, the dark rot at the heart of many criminal enterprises. We have to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're just coming up on last segment of our program, bringing it to an end. A couple more stories about computers, and this one is very interesting. And I think we've already seen it in a recent TV commercial involving animated yearbook photos. New technology produced by computer scientists at Princeton University will have the ability to add words into a voice recording by editing a text transcript of the recording. And what this means is if they get an audio recording of you saying, I love fluffy bunnies, this software will allow them to edit the text of what you say and then re-record using your voice, you saying that. Now, obviously, for botched audio recordings on film and TV, this would be a blessing, but I'm sure you can agree with me, the potential for abuse is definitely there. And as more and more of this software becomes available, it underscores the fact that you cannot trust what you hear and see in the corporate media because it can be manufactured. Now, then a lot of people are over there looking at Snopes as the definitive arbitrator of what is real versus fake news, and Snopes, of course, is saying there's absolutely nothing to the claim that Seth Rich was the DNC leak. But Snopes itself has come under serious concern. Apparently, Snopes, who was openly promoting the Hillary Clinton propaganda last year, and they were caught embezzling their profits on prostitutes, have now been caught accepting money from Monsanto to debunk articles that claim glyphosate is dangerous. So apparently Snopes is out there basically cashing in on their reputation. If you are a large corporation peddling a dangerous product and you are willing to make a donation to Snopes, Snopes will then write articles saying, oh, this claim that glyphosate causes cancer, it's completely false. It's completely false. I guess everybody has a price, and if you're out there wasting money on prostitutes, I guess your price is pretty low. Here in Hawaii, we've had something a little bit unsettling happen these last few days. There's a huge mass of dead sea creatures washing ashore on our beaches. I know the Bureau of Tourism doesn't want that to get on out, but it's especially along Mokulea Beach, and it's literally turning into a pink tide. There are these thousands of crustaceans that have died and they're washing ashore, and nobody knows where they came from or why they're dying. They're concerned, is it chemical runoff from the military bases? Is it Fukushima radiation finally catching up with us? We're not really sure, but obviously something needs to be looked at. And finally, an article that came out of Patriot Rising, America's Fukushima. If we don't act now, we will not be able to avoid the next one. And of course, they're talking about Hanford, which is just sitting there, radiating, leaking, and nobody seems to want to do anything about it. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, share everything you hear here with everybody that you know. Try and get the truth out there, especially about Seth Rich. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.